The gunshot echoed across the plains like a distant thunderclap, leaving only silence in its wake as Josephine Miller stepped down from the stagecoach into the dust of Promise Creek, Texas. The year was 1873, and the journey from Boston had taken nearly 3 weeks, a journey made for a wedding that would never happen. Josephine's cream-colored traveling dress was wrinkled and stained with the evidence of the long trek, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins as she surveyed the small frontier town with exhausted eyes. She clutched a telegram in her gloved hand, the paper worn from countless readings, though the message remained unchanged. Travis killed in dispute. Sorry for your loss. Still welcome if you choose to come. Garrett Sullivan, Promise Creek Ranch. The telegram had reached her midway through her journey west, delivered to a way station in Missouri. By then, turning back seemed as impossible as continuing forward. With no family remaining in Boston and her teaching position already filled, Josephine had made the decision to face whatever awaited her in Texas. Miss Miller, a deep voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to see a tall man approaching, hat in hand. The sun cast his features in sharp relief, strong jawline, weathered skin that spoke of years under the harsh western sun, and eyes the color of a summer storm. I'm Garrett Sullivan. Josephine recognized the name from the telegram. Mr. Sullivan, she acknowledged, her voice steadier than she felt. I received your message. I figured you might turn back. His expression was unreadable, though there was a gentleness in his tone that hadn't been present in his written words. I had nowhere to turn back to, she answered honestly. Garrett nodded as if her answer made perfect sense. He gestured toward a wagon parked at the edge of the street. Ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I can take you there now, or if you'd prefer to rest at the hotel, I would rather continue if it's all the same to you. Josephine needed answers more than she needed rest. As Garrett loaded her trunk onto the wagon, she found herself studying him. This wasn't what she had expected. In her correspondence with Travis over the past year, he had mentioned his business partner only in passing a friend from the war who had pooled resources with him to build the cattle ranch. She had envisioned someone more like Travis himself, refined despite his frontier living, educated perhaps with the same gentle mannerisms that had come through in Travis's letters. Garrett Sullivan was none of those things. His movements were economical and precise. His clothes, while clean, were worn and practical. When he spoke, his words were few but carefully chosen. This was a man who had been shaped by the land itself, hard in some places, yielding in others, but wholly formed by the rugged existence of the West. You must have questions, he said as they left the town behind, the wagon bouncing along the uneven trail. How did he die? The question had haunted her since receiving the telegram. Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. Land dispute. Man named Carver claimed Travis was building on his property. There'd been talk of it for months, but nothing serious until. He cleared his throat. Travis wasn't armed, wasn't expecting trouble. And this Carver, Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper, gone, rode out after. Sheriff's men are looking, but... He let the sentence hang unfinished in the air between them. They rode in silence for a time, the landscape stretching out around them, rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional oak, cattle grazing in the distance. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that Boston could never match. Travis wrote about this place as if it were paradise, Josephine said, more to herself than to him. He believed it could be, Garrett replied. That's why he sent for you. He'd finished the house just 2 weeks before. He paused. He wanted everything to be perfect for your arrival, the words caught in Josephine's throat. And now, Garrett turned to look at her fully for the first time since they'd left town. Now, Miss Miller, the decision is yours. Travis left his half of the ranch to you in his will. You can sell it, I'd buy it if I had the money, which I don't at present, or you can stay. Stay, the words seemed impossible. I know nothing about ranching, Mr. Sullivan. Travis didn't either when he first came. Man could barely sit a horse. A ghost of a smile crossed Garrett's face at the memory. But he learned, we all do out here, and you would be comfortable with such an arrangement. A woman you've never met before today becoming your business partner, comfortable? Garrett seemed to consider the word. Probably not. But Travis believed in you. That counts for something with me. As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view, a sprawling main house constructed of timber and stone, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and beyond them, herds of cattle dotting the landscape. It was larger than Josephine had imagined, more established. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's unfinished, Garrett corrected her. Travis had plans, many plans. As they approached the house, several ranch hands stopped their work to watch. Their curious gazes followed the wagon, and Josephine felt suddenly self-conscious of her travel-worn appearance. Garrett helped her down from the wagon, and as her feet touched the ground of what might have been her home, might still be her home, the reality of her situation washed over her with renewed force. She had come to marry a man she knew only through letters. That man was dead. And now she stood beside a stranger who offered her a life she had never prepared for. "I've had Rosa prepare a room for you," Garrett said, nodding toward the house. "She's our cook. There's hot water if you'd like to wash up. We can talk more at supper." "Thank you," Josephine said, suddenly overwhelmed by the simple kindness. As Garrett led her toward the house, a woman emerged, short and stout, with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes that assessed Josephine with a mother's concern. "Miss Miller, this is Rosa Hernandez," Garrett introduced. "Rosa, this is Miss Josephine Miller." "Welcome, señorita." Rosa's smile was warm. "Come, I show you your room. You must be tired from such a long journey." Josephine followed Rosa into the house, struck immediately by the contrast between the rugged exterior and the carefully crafted interior. The furnishings were simple but of good quality. Curtains hung at the windows, rugs covered portions of the wooden floors, and on the mantel above the stone fireplace sat several books, evidence of Travis's presence and preferences. "Mr. Travis spoke of you often," Rosa said as she led Josephine up a staircase to the second floor. "He was very happy you were coming." Josephine swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. "I was looking forward to meeting him as well." Rosa opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a large window overlooking the ranch. A copper tub stood in one corner, steam rising from the water that had been prepared for her. "I am sorry for your loss," Rosa said quietly, "but perhaps God has other plans for you here." After Rosa left, Josephine stood alone in the middle of the room, uncertain what to do next. The journey had been long, the news devastating, and now she found herself in a place both foreign and oddly welcoming. She moved to the window, looking out at the vast Texas landscape that stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere out there was the future she had imagined with Travis. Now that future had vanished, replaced by something unknown. She unpinned her hair fully, letting it fall around her shoulders as she began to unbutton her travel dress. The water in the tub beckoned, promising to wash away at least the physical discomfort of her journey, if not the emotional turmoil. As she soaked in the warm water, Josephine considered her options. She could return to Boston, though the thought held little appeal. She could sell her inheritance and move to another city, perhaps St. Louis or even San Francisco, where she might find employment as a teacher again. Or she could stay, learning a new way of life in a place Travis had loved. None of these choices seemed clear or easy. And lurking beneath them all was the imposing figure of Garrett Sullivan, a man who seemed both reluctant and resigned to her presence, yet had extended his welcome nonetheless. After her bath, Josephine dressed in one of the simpler gowns she had brought west, a cornflower blue that Travis had once mentioned in a letter was his favorite color. The thought brought fresh pain, but she pushed it aside as she made her way downstairs. She found Garrett at a large table in the dining room, papers spread before him as he made notations in a ledger. He stood when she entered, closing the book. "You look refreshed, Miss Miller," he said, though his eyes lingered on her face with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Sullivan. I know my arrival must be complicated for you." "No more complicated than it is for you, I expect." He gestured for her to sit. "Rosa's preparing supper. Thought we might talk beforehand." Josephine took the offered seat, folding her hands in her lap. I confess I'm not entirely sure what to say. This situation is unexpected, he finished for her, for both of us. Travis rarely mentioned you in his letters, she said carefully. I know you served together in the war and that you started this ranch together, but little else. A shadow crossed Garrett's face. Travis and I were different men with different ways. He had a gift for words, I don't. Yet you were partners, we balanced each other. He had the education, the plans, I had the experience with cattle and horses. Garrett paused. He was a good man, Miss Miller, better than most. Please call me Josephine, she said, touched by the simple tribute. If we're to discuss my future here, formality seems unnecessary. Garrett nodded. Josephine, then? Her name sounded different in his deep voice, almost musical. And I'm Garrett to most everyone except Rosa, who insists on calling me Senor Sullivan no matter how many times I correct her. A small smile found its way to Josephine's lips, perhaps the first since receiving the telegram. How long have you known Rosa? She came with the ranch. Was cooking for the previous owner when Travis and I bought the place 4 years ago, decided to stay on. Good thing, too. Neither of us could cook worth a damn, pardon my language, and the ranch has prospered. It has. He seemed more comfortable discussing business, his shoulders relaxing slightly. We've tripled our herd since starting, built most of what you see. This coming cattle drive should put us firmly in the black. Cattle drive to Kansas, railroads there, best prices. Garrett leaned forward. That's something we should discuss. I leave in 2 weeks with most of the men. We'll be gone nearly 2 months. Josephine felt a flutter of alarm. And I would be here, alone, not alone. Rosa stays, so does Jacob, our foreman, and a couple of the younger hands. Garrett studied her reaction. It's normal operation for a ranch this size. Travis would have gone too. Of course, Josephine said, though the thought of being left at the ranch so soon after arriving was unsettling. I'm afraid I know very little about the practical aspects of running a ranch. Travis mentioned you were a teacher, Garrett said, surprising her with this knowledge. Yes, for 5 years at a girls' school in Boston. Teaching's valuable here, no proper school for miles. Some of the hands have children, others in the area too. They'd benefit from learning. Josephine hadn't considered this possibility. You think I could teach here? I think you could do whatever you set your mind to, Garrett said simply. But the decision to stay or go is yours alone. I won't pressure you either way. Their conversation was interrupted by Rosa bringing in supper, a hearty stew with fresh bread, followed by apple pie that reminded Josephine of home. As they ate, Garrett told her more about the ranch, the surrounding area, and the people who worked for them. He spoke factually, without embellishment, yet Josephine found herself drawn into his descriptions of life in this corner of Texas. After supper, he offered to show her the rest of the house. It was larger than it appeared, with several bedrooms upstairs, a study that had clearly been Travis's domain, and a small library that made Josephine's heart leap with unexpected joy. Travis ordered most of these from catalogs, Garrett explained, watching her examine the shelves. Said a proper home needed books. He was right, Josephine said softly, running her fingers along the spines. I left most of mine behind. There wasn't room in my trunk. These are yours now if you want them. She turned to look at him, struck by the generosity of the offer. Thank you. As the tour concluded, they stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the land. The sky blazed with colors Josephine had never seen in Boston, deep oranges and purples that seemed to set the very air aflame. It truly is beautiful here, she said. It can be harsh too, Garrett warned. Summers are brutal, winters can be deadly, and there's always the threat of drought or disease in the herds. You're not making a very compelling case for me to stay, Mr. Sullivan, Josephine said, a note of wry humor in her voice. To her surprise, he laughed a low, rich sound that transformed his face entirely. Just want you to know what you'd be getting into. This isn't Boston. No, she agreed, it certainly isn't. That night, lying in a bed that should have been her marriage bed, Josephine stared at the ceiling and considered the strange turns her life had taken. She had come west expecting to begin a new life with a man she had grown to care for through his words. Instead, she found herself mourning not just Travis's death, but the future they would never share. And then there was Garrett Sullivan, a man as different from Travis as the Texas plains were from Boston's cobblestone streets. He had welcomed her, despite the awkwardness of the situation. Had offered her choices when she felt adrift. There was something compelling about his straightforward manner, his evident commitment to the ranch he and Travis had built together. Sleep came fitfully, dreams mixing with memories until Josephine wasn't sure which was which. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of the ranch already alive with activity. Dressing quickly in a simple skirt and shirtwaist, she made her way downstairs to find Rosa in the kitchen, kneading dough with practiced movements. "Good morning, señorita," Rosa greeted her. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as could be expected," Josephine answered honestly. "Is Mr. Sullivan about?" "Señor Sullivan is always up before the sun," Rosa said with a fond shake of her head. "Check the corral, he is breaking the new horses today." Following Rosa's directions, Josephine walked outside, shielding her eyes against the bright morning light. She spotted Garrett immediately in the center of a round corral, working with a spirited black horse. He moved with confidence, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones that Josephine couldn't quite make out from her distance. She approached the fence, watching as man and horse engaged in what seemed like a complicated dance, the horse resisting, Garrett insisting, neither fully yielding but both seeking some mutual understanding. "He has a way with them," a voice said beside her, and Josephine turned to see an older man with silver hair and a weathered face. "Animals sense when a man is genuine. Can't fool a horse like you can a person." "You must be Jacob," Josephine guessed, recalling the foreman Garrett had mentioned. "Jacob Wilson, madam." He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, "and you'd be Travis's intended." "Josephine Miller," she confirmed, "though I suppose I'm no longer anyone's intended." Jacob's eyes were kind. "Sorry about Travis, good man, had big dreams for this place, so I've heard." Josephine returned her attention to Garrett, who had succeeded in placing a saddle on the horse and was now mounting with careful movements. "Is that dangerous, working with an untrained horse?" "Everything out here's got some danger to it," Jacob said with a shrug. "But Garrett knows what he's doing. Never seen a better horseman, and I've seen plenty." As if to prove Jacob's point, the horse beneath Garrett bucked suddenly, a violent motion that should have unseated him. Instead, he moved with the animal, his body absorbing the shock, his hands steady on the reins. The horse bucked again, and again Garrett stayed mounted, his expression calm, focused. "He'll wear himself out soon," Jacob predicted. "Then the real training begins." True to Jacob's words, the horse's resistance gradually lessened, its movements becoming less frantic until finally it stood still, sides heaving with exertion. Garrett leaned forward, patting the animal's neck, speaking to it with what appeared to be genuine affection. "There we go," Jacob said with satisfaction. "Another one broken, that's the third this week." Garrett guided the horse to the fence where Josephine and Jacob stood. Up close, she could see sweat beading on his forehead, dust coating his clothes, but his eyes were bright with accomplishment. "Morning," he greeted them both. "I see you've met Jacob." "Just making introductions," Jacob said. "Thought I'd show Miss Miller around today if you're agreeable, give her a sense of the operation." "Good idea," Garrett nodded. "I'll be busy with the horses most of the day." He looked at Josephine. "Unless there's something specific you'd like to discuss." "No," she said quickly. "A tour would be most welcome. I'd like to understand more about the ranch." Jacob proved to be an excellent guide. Throughout the morning, he showed Josephine the various aspects of the ranch: the cattle pens, the hay storage, the smithy where a young man named Daniel was shoeing horses, the bunkhouse where most of the hands lived. He introduced her to the workers they encountered, all of whom regarded her with curiosity but greeted her politely. "How many men work here?" she asked as they walked. "Regular crews about 15, Jacob answered. "More during busy seasons, good mix of experience. Some veterans like Garrett and me, some younger fellows learning the trade." "And do any have families nearby?" "A few. Tom Miller, no relation to you, I expect, has a wife and 3 little ones about 2 miles east. The Martinez brothers have their families just south of our property." Daniel, our blacksmith, just got married last month. His wife's expecting. Josephine filed this information away, thinking of Garrett's suggestion about teaching. Is there any sort of school in the area? Nearest proper school's in Promise Creek, and that's more of a one-room affair with a teacher who's barely older than her students. Jacob glanced at her with newfound interest. You thinking of starting something here? Perhaps, Josephine said, not wanting to commit to anything yet. It was just a thought. By midday, they had covered much of the ranch's main operations. Jacob escorted her back to the house, where Rosa had prepared a simple lunch of cold chicken and fresh bread. Thank you for the tour, Josephine said sincerely as they parted. It's given me much to think about. Ranch like this needs good people, Jacob replied. Travis knew that, Garrett does too. After lunch, Josephine found herself drawn to Travis's study. It felt wrong somehow to enter this private space, yet she needed to know more about the man she had agreed to marry, the man whose property she now partly owned. The room was neat and organized, with a desk positioned to take advantage of the natural light from a large window. Bookshelves lined one wall, containing volumes on cattle breeding, land management, and Texas law, interspersed with a few novels and poetry collections. On the desk sat a ledger similar to the one Garrett had been examining the previous evening. Josephine hesitated before opening it, but reasoned that if she was to make an informed decision about her future here, she needed to understand the ranch's financial situation. The ledger revealed careful accounting income from cattle sales, expenses for feed and supplies, wages for the hands. According to the most recent entries, the ranch was indeed profitable, though not excessively so. A small drawer in the desk contained personal papers, Travis's military discharge, the deed to the ranch with both his and Garrett's names, and a bundle of letters tied with string. With a start, Josephine recognized her own handwriting on the topmost envelope. These were the letters she had sent to Travis over the past year. She untied the string, spreading the letters across the desk. There were more than she had expected, each one carefully preserved. The sight brought tears to her eyes. She had known Travis only through his words and hers, yet there had been a connection between them, a meeting of minds if not bodies. I didn't mean to intrude. Josephine looked up to find Garrett standing in the doorway, hat in hand. She hastily began gathering the letters. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No need to apologize, he said, stepping into the room. This is partly your house now, and those were written to you. He kept them all, she said softly. He read them to me sometimes, Garrett admitted, surprising her. The parts about Boston, the school where you taught, said you had a way with words that made him see places he'd never been. The thought of Travis sharing her letters with this man was strange, yet oddly comforting. Did you write to anyone? During that time, a shadow passed over Garrett's face. No, never been much for letter writing, or reading, truth be told, though Travis tried to improve me. I didn't mean to pry, Josephine said, noticing his discomfort. You didn't, Garrett gestured to the desk. Find anything useful in the ledger? The ranch seems to be doing well, she observed, grateful for the change of subject. Well enough. This drive should put us ahead after that. He paused. Travis had plans to expand, buy more land to the north, increase the herd, ambitious plans. And what did you think of these plans? Garrett seemed surprised by the question. Thought they were sound if we could manage the initial investment. Travis had the vision, I provided the caution. Balance, Josephine said, recalling his earlier description of their partnership. Exactly. He studied her for a moment. Jacob says you asked about schools. I was curious. If I were to stay, I would want to be useful. Teaching would be useful, Garrett agreed. But there's no obligation. Your half of the ranch entitles you to half the profits, regardless of your contribution. I've never been comfortable with idleness, Mr. Sullivan. Garrett, he corrected her gently. Garrett, she amended. If I stay and I haven't decided yet, I would want a purpose. Teaching could provide that, he nodded, accepting her reasoning. There's a building near the east boundary. Used to be a line shack before we built the bunkhouse. Could be converted for classes without too much trouble. The fact that he had already considered the logistics touched her. You've given this some thought. Travis mentioned your teaching in his letters. Said you were passionate about education, especially for girls. Garrett shrugged, as if embarrassed by revealing this knowledge. Seemed natural you might want to continue that work here. Before Josephine could respond, Rosa appeared in the doorway. Senor Sullivan, riders coming. Looks like the Carver boys. Garrett's expression hardened immediately. Stay here, he told Josephine, striding from the room. Ignoring his instruction, Josephine followed him onto the porch, where he was already buckling on a gun belt. 3 riders were approaching at a steady pace, dust rising behind them. Who are they? She asked, standing beside him. Carver's sons, Garrett said grimly. Probably looking for trouble. The man who killed Travis, his boys, mean streak like their father. Garrett checked his revolver before holstering it. Stay back, Josephine, let me handle this. Several ranch hands had appeared, positioning themselves strategically around the yard. Jacob stood nearby, a rifle held casually but ready. The tension in the air was palpable as the riders drew closer. They stopped a short distance from the house, 3 young men with hard eyes and an air of barely contained violence. The oldest, a man perhaps in his early 30s with a shock of red hair, spoke first. Sullivan, he called. Heard you got a visitor, Travis's mail-order bride. Garrett's voice was level when he responded. Your business isn't here, Luke. Best ride on. Just being neighborly, Luke Carver replied with a smirk. Paying respects to the widow, though I guess she ain't exactly a widow, is she? More like damaged goods, traveled all this way for nothing. Josephine felt the insult like a physical blow, but kept her expression neutral, unwilling to give these men the satisfaction of seeing her distress. That's enough, Garrett said, his tone dangerously quiet. Say what you came to say and go. The second brother, younger with the same red hair, leaned forward in his saddle. Pa's still missing. Sheriff's asking questions. Thought you might know something about that. Your father shot an unarmed man and fled, Garrett replied. That's all I know. Pa said Travis was building on our land, the third brother insisted. Had every right to defend his property. That land dispute was settled legally 6 months ago, Jacob interjected. Court ruled in our favor. Your father knew that. Courts don't mean much out here, Luke said, his hand drifting toward his holstered pistol. We still consider that north section ours, and we aim to take it back. Not today you don't, Garrett said, his own hand resting on his gun. 3 of you, 15 of us, bad odds even for Carvers. A tense silence followed as Luke assessed the situation, clearly noting the armed ranch hands surrounding them. Finally, he nudged his horse backward. Another time then, when the odds are better. There won't be a better time, Garrett warned. That land is legally ours. Any attempt to take it will be met with force. Luke's gaze shifted to Josephine, his eyes cold and calculating. Pretty little thing, shame about Travis. Still, might be for the best. Boston ladies don't last long out here, too soft for Texas living. Josephine stepped forward before Garrett could respond. I appreciate your concern for my welfare, Mr. Carver, but I assure you I'm hardier than I look. Her calm response seemed to unsettle Luke, who had clearly expected fear or tears. He recovered quickly, offering a mocking tip of his hat. We'll see about that, madam. Texas has a way of testing people. Some pass, some don't. With that, the 3 brothers turned their horses and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in their wake. Garrett turned to Josephine, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. You shouldn't have engaged with them. Should I have hidden inside instead? She countered. Let them think I'm afraid. It's not about fear, it's about safety. Garrett's voice was tight with controlled emotion. The Carvers are dangerous men. Their father killed Travis, and they do the same to any of us given half a chance. Then perhaps it's good that I spoke, Josephine said. Let them see that Travis's interests are still being defended, even after his death. Something shifted in Garrett's expression, surprise and perhaps a reluctant respect. Just be careful. They'll be watching the ranch now, looking for weaknesses. Jacob approached, rifle still in hand. Want me to send a couple of boys to trail them, make sure they leave our property? Garrett nodded. Good idea, and double the night watch until further notice. As Jacob moved away to issue the orders, Garrett turned back to Josephine. This is the reality of ranching in Texas, land disputes, cattle rustling, men like the Carvers who think might makes right. I'm beginning to understand that, she said quietly. And it doesn't change your mind about staying. Josephine considered the question seriously. The confrontation had been frightening, yes, but there had also been something exhilarating about standing her ground, about being part of something worth defending. Not yet, she answered honestly, though I reserve the right to reconsider if they return with more men. To her surprise, Garrett laughed that same rich sound she had heard the night before. Fair enough, now come inside. Rosa will have my hide if we're late for supper. The next few days fell into a pattern. Josephine spent mornings exploring the ranch, afternoons reading in the library or Travis's study, and evenings sharing meals with Garrett and occasionally Jacob. She learned more about the operation of the ranch, asked questions about the cattle business, and began to form a picture of what her life might be like if she chose to stay. She also learned more about Garrett Sullivan. He was 34, had served as a cavalry officer during the war, and had met Travis when they were both recuperating from wounds in a field hospital. Unlike Travis, who had come from a wealthy Virginia family, Garrett had grown up on a small farm in Tennessee, learning about horses and cattle from his father before the war took both his parents and the farm. Travis had the money, I had the experience, he explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Seemed like a good partnership. And it was, Josephine asked. Best decision I ever made, Garrett confirmed. Built something real here. Something worth protecting, Josephine said, thinking of the Carvers. Yes, Garrett studied her in the fading light. Have you decided yet whether you'll stay? I'm leaning toward yes, she admitted. Though the thought of you leaving for the cattle drive so soon is concerning. We could delay it, Garrett offered, surprising her. Wait until you're more settled. No, Josephine said firmly. The ranch needs the income from the drive. I won't disrupt operations because of my circumstances. Garrett nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. I've been thinking. You should learn to shoot. The suggestion caught her off guard. I've never handled a firearm. All the more reason to learn. Jacob's a good teacher. He could start you tomorrow. Josephine considered the practical wisdom of the suggestion. Very well, I suppose it's a necessary skill here. The next morning, Jacob met her behind the barn, carrying 2 revolvers and a rifle. He began with safety instructions, his manner patient and thorough as he explained how to check if a gun was loaded, how to hold it properly, and the basics of aiming. Start with the revolver, he advised, handing her a smaller pistol than the one Garrett wore. Lighter, easier to control. Josephine was surprised by the weight of it in her hand, the cool metal warming to her touch as Jacob positioned her arm and explained the sights. When she fired her first shot at the targets he had set up bottles placed on a distant fence, the recoil shocked her, the noise making her ears ring despite his warning. Missed by a mile, Jacob said cheerfully. Everyone does it first, try again, this time breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. By the end of the lesson, Josephine had managed to hit 2 bottles, which Jacob assured her was excellent progress for a beginner. Her arm ached, and there was a strange sense of power that came with wielding such a deadly instrument. We'll practice every day, Jacob promised as they walked back to the house. You'll be a regular Annie Oakley in no time. Garrett was in the corral again, this time working with a sorrel mare that seemed more cooperative than the black horse had been. He paused in his training to watch as Josephine and Jacob approached. How'd she do? He called. Natural talent, Jacob replied with a grin. Hit 2 bottles on her first day, Garrett's eyebrows rose. Impressive, most folks can't hit anything their first time. I had an excellent teacher, Josephine said, smiling at Jacob. Keep practicing, Garrett advised. Out here, it could save your life someday. The blunt assessment sobered her, reminding her again of the realities of frontier life. It was one thing to enjoy the beauty of the ranch, the freedom and purpose she was beginning to find here. It was another to acknowledge the dangers that came with this life. That evening, after supper, Josephine found Garrett in the library, holding a book with a bemused expression. He looked up when she entered, closing the volume quickly as if embarrassed to be caught reading. Don't let me interrupt, she said, moving to leave. No, stay, he said, gesturing to the other chair. I was just... He held up the book, a collection of Wordsworth's poetry. Travis insisted I read this once, said it would elevate my sensibilities, never got past the first few pages. Would you like me to read some aloud? Josephine offered, taking the seat across from him. Wordsworth is best appreciated when spoken, I think. Garrett hesitated, then handed her the book. If you wouldn't mind. Josephine opened to a random page and began to read, her voice soft in the quiet room. She chose, I wandered lonely as a cloud, the familiar words flowing naturally as she gave them life. When she finished, she looked up to find Garrett watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You have a gift for it, he said simply. Making the words mean something? Poetry is meant to be shared, she replied. It loses something when kept silent on the page. Travis said something similar once. Garrett's expression grew thoughtful. He used to read to the hand sometimes on winter evenings when there wasn't much else to do. They pretended to complain, but they listened. Perhaps we could continue that tradition, Josephine suggested. Once the weather turns cold again, perhaps we could. Garrett seemed about to say more when a knock at the front door interrupted them. Jacob's voice called from the entryway. Garrett, sheriff's here. They found Sheriff Davis in the main room, a tall man with a graying mustache and tired eyes. He removed his hat when Josephine entered, nodding politely. Miss Miller, sorry to intrude so late. I'm Sheriff Thomas Davis from Promise Creek. Sheriff, she acknowledged. Is there news of a sort? Davis looked to Garrett. We found Carver, dead up in the hills north of here. Been there a while from the looks of it. Garrett's expression remained neutral. How'd he die? Shot, once in the chest. The sheriff's gaze was assessing. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? I haven't seen Carver since the day he killed Travis, Garrett answered evenly. You're welcome to ask any of the hands. I haven't left the ranch. Davis nodded slowly. Already talked to Jacob. He confirms it. Still, it's mighty convenient. Carver kills your partner, then turns up dead himself. I won't pretend to mourn the man, Garrett said, but I didn't kill him. His boys are saying otherwise, Davis warned, stirring up talk in town, saying you ambushed him as he was leaving the area. The Carvers were here just a few days ago, Josephine interjected. If their father was already dead, why would they come asking about his whereabouts? The sheriff turned to her, surprise evident on his face. You saw them? Yes, they came to the ranch, 3 of them. They specifically asked if Mr. Sullivan knew where their father was. Davis considered this information. That does complicate their story. Still, someone shot Carver and given the bad blood between your ranches. We'll keep our guard up, Garrett said. The Carvers won't take this lying down, regardless of who actually killed their father. After the sheriff left, Garrett turned to Josephine. Thank you for speaking up. That might have gone differently without your testimony. I only told the truth, she said. Do you think the Carvers will retaliate eventually? Garrett confirmed. But they'll bide their time. Wait until after the cattle drive when we're shorthanded. The realization settled heavily between them. All the more reason for me to continue my shooting lessons, Josephine said with more confidence than she felt. Garrett's gaze softened. All the more reason for you to reconsider staying. You didn't sign up for a range war, Josephine. No, she agreed. I signed up to marry Travis and build a life here. The first part of that plan is no longer possible, but the second remains an option that comes with considerable risk. Life is risk, Garrett, she said quietly. Even in Boston, nothing is certain. He regarded her with that same intense look she had noticed in the library. You're not what I expected, Josephine Miller. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Neither, both. He shook his head slightly. Travis described you as gentle, refined, a proper Boston lady. And you find me otherwise. I find you stronger than he led me to believe, Garrett said. More adaptable. Travis was worried you might not adjust to ranch life. I'm beginning to think his concern was misplaced. The assessment pleased her more than it should have. I'm still deciding if I belong here, but I won't be driven away by threats. The next morning, Josephine woke with a sense of purpose. If she was truly considering making the ranch her home, she needed to understand all aspects of its operation. She dressed in her most practical skirt and a shirtwaist, pulling her hair back in a simple knot. She found Garrett in the stable, saddling his horse. "I'd like to see the northern section today," she announced. "The land the Carvers dispute." Garrett straightened, studying her with surprise. "That's a good hour's ride from here." "Then I'll need a horse," she said simply, a slow smile spread across his face. "Can you ride, Miss Miller?" "I had lessons as a girl," she admitted, "though it's been some years." "Well then," Garrett said, reaching for another saddle, "let's see if it's like they say that you never truly forget." The horse Garrett selected for her was a gentle mare named Daisy, patient with Josephine's initially awkward mounting and tentative commands. Once settled in the saddle, however, muscle memory began to return, and by the time they rode out from the ranch yard, Josephine felt more confident. They rode side by side, Garrett occasionally offering tips on how to sit or hold the reins. The land spread out around them, rolling hills giving way to stands of oak and mesquite, streams cutting through valleys where cattle grazed in the morning light. "It's even more beautiful from horseback," Josephine observed. "Best way to see it," Garrett agreed. "Travis never took to riding. Preferred the wagon right to the end." "You must miss him," she said carefully. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "He was the closest thing to family I had after the war, more than a business partner, a brother of sorts." "I'm sorry," Josephine said simply, understanding that the words were inadequate for such a loss. They rode in companionable silence until Garrett pointed to a distant ridge. "That's the northern boundary. The disputed section starts just beyond that line of trees." As they crested the ridge, Josephine could see the land in question, a fertile valley with a stream running through it, ideal for grazing cattle. "I can see why the Carvers want it," she said. "It looks valuable." "It is," Garrett confirmed. "Best water access for miles." Travis had plans to build a second house up here eventually, for the foreman or maybe for himself if He trailed off, perhaps realizing the implication of his words. "If he and I wanted our own home," Josephine finished for him. "Yes," Garrett dismounted, helping her down from her horse. "He wanted to show you all of this himself, had it all planned out." They stood together, looking out over the valley. The beauty of it was undeniable, as was its practical value to the ranch. Yet Josephine found herself increasingly aware of the man beside her, his strength, his quiet confidence, the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair. "Why did you agree to him writing to me?" she asked suddenly. "You must have known his intentions." Garrett seemed surprised by the question. "Travis was determined to find a wife, said the ranch needed a woman's touch when he found your advertisement in that Boston newspaper." "You thought it was a mistake," Josephine guessed. "I thought it was hasty," Garrett corrected, "but Travis was always certain about what he wanted." "And he wanted you?" The simple statement sent an unexpected pang through Josephine's heart. "Based on a few letters. He said your letters showed your character, your intelligence, said you were exactly what this place needed." "And what do you think?" Josephine asked, turning to face him fully. "Now that I'm here," Garrett met her gaze, his eyes the color of the storm clouds gathering on the distant horizon. "I think Travis was right about your character, your intelligence." He paused. "But I'm not sure this ranch is what you need." Before Josephine could respond, a flash of movement caught her attention. In the valley below, 3 riders emerged from the tree line, the distinctive red hair of the Carvers visible even at this distance. Garrett saw them too, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. "We need to go. Now." They mounted quickly, Garrett leading them away from the ridge and back toward the main ranch at a pace faster than Josephine was entirely comfortable with. She clung to the saddle, determined not to slow them down. "Did they see us?" she asked as they rode. "Probably," Garrett replied grimly. "But they're on the other side of the valley. Would take them time to reach us." "What would they have done? If they had caught us there," Garrett's expression was grim, "nothing good. The Carvers don't distinguish between men and women when it comes to their grievances." They rode hard for 20 minutes before Garrett finally slowed their pace, allowing the horses to catch their breath. Rain had begun to fall, light at first but steadily increasing. "Storm's coming in faster than I expected," Garrett said, scanning the darkening sky. "We need to find shelter." "Aren't we close to the ranch?" Josephine asked, already feeling the chill as raindrops soaked through her clothing. Not close enough. There's a line shack about a mile from here. We can wait out the worst of it there. The rain became a downpour as they approached the small cabin Garrett had mentioned. By the time they dismounted and led the horses under a lean to attach to the structure, both Josephine and Garrett were drenched. The interior of the line shack was sparse but clean, a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Garrett immediately set about starting a fire in the stove while Josephine stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. "You're shivering," Garrett observed, the fire catching under his experienced hands. "There are blankets in that trunk. And probably some of Jacob's old clothes. They'll be too big, but they're dry." Josephine hesitated only briefly before practicality overcame modesty. She found the trunk and withdrew a wool blanket and a flannel shirt that indeed would swallow her whole. "I'll step outside," Garrett offered, heading for the door. "Don't be ridiculous," Josephine said. "You're as wet as I am. Turn your back if you must, but don't go back into that storm." Garrett nodded, facing the stove as Josephine quickly removed her sodden outer garments, keeping her chemise and drawers in place as she pulled on the oversized shirt. The warmth of the dry fabric was immediate relief. "You can turn around now," she said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders for additional warmth. Garrett had removed his own wet shirt, revealing a torso marked by the evidence of a hard life scars from what must have been war wounds, muscles developed through years of physical labor. He quickly pulled on a dry shirt from the trunk, and Josephine averted her eyes, though not before noticing a particularly vicious scar that ran along his left side. "The stove should warm the place soon," he said, seemingly unaware of her observation. "Storm might last a while, though." "How did you know this place would be stocked?" Josephine asked, taking one of the chairs near the growing warmth of the stove. "All the line shacks are kept ready," Garrett explained. "Never know when you might need shelter. Storms, injuries, unexpected overnight work." Thunder crashed outside, making Josephine jump slightly. Garrett smiled at her reaction. "Just noise," he assured her. "We're safe here." "From the storm, perhaps," she said. "But what about the Carvers? Will they continue in this weather?" "Doubtful. Even they have enough sense to seek shelter." Garrett sat in the other chair, running a hand through his damp hair. "We'll wait until it passes, then head straight back to the ranch." They sat in silence for a time, the only sounds the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. The small space grew warmer and Josephine found herself relaxing despite the circumstances. "You never answered my question," she said finally, "about what you think of me being here." Garrett looked up, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I think you're braver than most men I know. Coming all this way to marry a man you'd never met, staying after learning he was dead, facing down the Carvers without flinching." "That's not bravery," Josephine disagreed. "It's necessity. I make the best choices available to me, as we all do." "Some people choose the easy path, regardless of where it leads," Garrett countered. "You don't strike me as one of them." "Neither do you," she observed. "You could have sold your share of the ranch after Travis died, started fresh somewhere without land disputes and vengeful neighbors." "This land is worth fighting for," Garrett said simply. "Yes," Josephine agreed. "I'm beginning to see that." The storm continued through the afternoon, trapping them in the small cabin as daylight gradually faded. Garrett found a lamp and lit it, casting long shadows across the walls. He also discovered some coffee and beans in a storage box, and soon the aroma of both cooking filled the space. They shared the simple meal, sitting across from each other at the small table. Josephine found herself studying Garrett's face in the lamplight, the strong lines of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his eyes seemed to reflect the flame of the lamp. "What?" he asked, noticing her scrutiny. "I was just thinking that Travis never described you in his letters," she said. "I had no idea what to expect. And am I a disappointment?" The question was asked lightly, but Josephine sensed a genuine curiosity beneath it. "No," she answered honestly. "Different from what I imagined, but not a disappointment." Garrett's expression softened. Travis was the better man of us two, more educated, more refined. You would have been well matched. Perhaps, Josephine said, or perhaps not. Letters can only reveal so much of a person's character. True enough. Garrett rose to check the weather, opening the door slightly to look outside. Rain's letting up. Another hour and we should be able to head back. Will they be worried at the ranch? Jacob will have guessed we sought shelter, Garrett assured her. He knows these lands as well as I do. As predicted, the rain stopped within the hour, though the sky remained overcast and threatening. They prepared to leave, Josephine reluctantly exchanging the dry shirt for her still damp clothes. The ride back to the ranch was slower than their outward journey, the horses picking their way carefully along muddy trails. Darkness had fallen completely by the time the lights of the main house came into view, a welcome sight after the day's adventures. Jacob met them in the yard, relief evident on his weathered face. Was about to send out a search party, he said as they dismounted. Storm caught you out, I take it? At the North Ridge, Garrett confirmed, helping Josephine down from her horse. Took shelter in the Willow Creek Line shack. Jacob's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made no comment on their unplanned time alone. Rosa's kept supper warm, and she's running a bath for Miss Miller. Bless that woman, Josephine said fervently, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must appear. Later, warm and clean and dressed in fresh clothing, Josephine joined Garrett in the dining room. He too had bathed and changed, his damp hair combed neatly back from his forehead. Feeling better? He asked as she took her seat. Much, she confirmed. Though I fear I'll be sore tomorrow from all that riding. It gets easier, he assured her. With practice. As they ate, Josephine found herself thinking about their day together, the ride, the shared moments in the Line shack, the simple meal they had prepared. There had been an ease between them that she hadn't anticipated, a comfort in his presence that seemed to grow with each passing day. I've made my decision, she said as they finished their meal. I'm staying, at least through the winter. After that, we can reassess the arrangement. Garrett's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. You're sure, even with the Carvers making threats? I'm sure, Josephine said firmly. This land is partly mine now. I want to see what I can make of it. Then I'll make arrangements before the cattle drive, Garrett said. Jacob will stay behind as planned, along with 4 of our most reliable hands. The house will be well protected in my absence. And I'll continue my shooting lessons, Josephine added. By the time you return, I hope to be hitting more than 2 bottles out of 10. Garrett smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed his face. I don't doubt it, Miss Miller. I don't doubt it at all. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Josephine continued her exploration of the ranch, now often on horseback as her riding skills improved. Jacob gave her daily shooting lessons, and to her surprise, she found herself enjoying the challenge. Her aim steadily improved, and by the end of the 2nd week, she could consistently hit 7 out of 10 targets with the revolver. Garrett was often busy with preparations for the cattle drive, but they still shared evening meals, and occasionally he would join her in the library, listening as she read aloud from Travis's collection of books. These quiet moments became something. Josephine looked forward to the chance to see Garrett relaxed, thoughtful, different from the hard-working rancher who dominated the daylight hours. She also began to make plans for the school. With Garrett's permission, she rode with Jacob to visit the building he had mentioned, the former Line shack near the eastern boundary. It was larger than the one where she and Garrett had sheltered from the storm, with ample space for a classroom once properly cleaned and furnished. Could have it ready by the time Garrett returns from the drive, Jacob estimated as they examined the structure. Need some new windows, proper desks, a blackboard, and students, Josephine added with a smile. Oh, you'll have those, Jacob assured her. Word's already spreading that Travis's intended is starting a school. The Martinez children alone will give you 6 pupils. Add in the others from nearby ranches, and you'll have a full classroom. The thought both excited and intimidated Josephine. This would be different from teaching at the Boston Girls' School with its rigid curriculum and uniform student body. Here, she would have children of various ages and backgrounds, many with limited previous education. It would be challenging, but also rewarding in a way her previous position had never been. The day before the cattle drive was set to depart, Garrett found Josephine in Travis's study, where she had been reviewing the ranch's accounts to better understand the financial aspects of the operation. "Got a minute?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Of course," she said, closing the ledger. "Is everything ready for tomorrow, as ready as it can be?" Garrett entered the room, placing a small box on the desk before her. "Wanted to give you this before I left." Curious, Josephine opened the box to find a revolver smaller than the one she had been practicing with, but clearly of good quality. "Garrett had it ordered from a gunsmith in San Antonio," he explained. "Lighter than Jacob's old Navy Colt, easier for you to handle." Josephine lifted the weapon, feeling its weight, noting the smooth walnut grip and the careful engraving along the barrel. "It's beautiful, in a deadly sort of way." "Beauty and danger often go hand in hand out here," Garrett said, watching as she examined his gift. "There's a holster, too. Jacob can show you how to wear it properly." "Thank you," Josephine said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I'll practice every day while you're gone." "Good." Garrett seemed about to say more, then hesitated. "I've also drawn up some papers, had them prepared in town yesterday." "Papers? Transferring my power of attorney to you while I'm away," he explained. "Gives you legal authority to act on behalf of the ranch in any capacity. Sign contracts, hire hands, deal with the bank if necessary." Josephine stared at him, stunned by the level of trust this represented. "Garrett, are you certain? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "Travis trusted you, I trust his judgment. And if I make a mistake, a bad decision that costs the ranch, you won't," Garrett said with surprising confidence. "You're too careful for that, too thorough." Josephine felt a warmth spread through her at his assessment. "I'll do my best to prove worthy of your trust." "You already have," he said quietly. Then, as if embarrassed by the sentiment, he straightened and adopted a more businesslike tone. "Jacob knows all the ranch operations. Consult him if you're unsure about anything." "I will," she promised. "And about the Carvers, I'll be vigilant," Josephine assured him. "The new school building is well within our boundaries, and I won't venture near the disputed land alone." Garrett nodded, seemingly satisfied with her precautions. 2 months, he said. "We should be back by mid-October, assuming all goes well." "I'll look forward to it," Josephine said, surprised to realize how much she meant it. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the start of the cattle drive. Josephine rose early, wanting to see Garrett and the men off. The ranch yard was a flurry of activity, horses being saddled, last-minute supplies loaded onto the chuck wagon, cowboys checking their gear. Garrett found her on the porch, dressed for riding in his trail clothes, his horse already saddled nearby. "Everything's set," he said. "Jacob knows what to do if there's trouble." "We'll be fine," Josephine assured him, though she felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of his departure. "Safe journey, Garrett." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "One more thing, I had this drawn up in town as well." Josephine opened it to find a will simple, straightforward, leaving Garrett's half of the ranch to her in the event of his death. "Garrett, this isn't necessary." "It is," he insisted. "Trail drives can be dangerous. River crossings, stampedes, rustlers. If something happens to me, I want to be sure the ranch stays intact. Stays with someone who'll care for it properly." Josephine was deeply moved by the gesture, understanding its significance. "I hope this document never needs to be executed." "So do I," Garrett said with the hint of a smile, "but a man doesn't reach my age in this country without learning to prepare for all possibilities." A shout from one of the cowhands indicated it was time to move out. Garrett put on his hat, adjusting it against the early morning sun. 2 months, he said again. "I'll be here," Josephine promised. She stood on the porch long after the dust from the departing herd had settled, an unfamiliar emptiness taking root inside her. The ranch seemed suddenly larger, quieter, though Jacob and the remaining hands were still visible going about their work. Rosa joined her, a knowing look in her dark eyes. "He will come back, Señorita. Señor Sullivan always comes back." I know, Josephine said, though in truth she knew no such thing. Life on the frontier was unpredictable, dangerous. No return was guaranteed. Come, Rosa said, guiding her back inside. We have much to do, no time for worrying. The older woman was right, of course. There was much to be done, and Josephine threw herself into the work with renewed determination. She spent the first week after Garrett's departure familiarizing herself with every aspect of the ranch's operation. Riding with Jacob to check on the remaining cattle, visiting the hands' families to introduce herself, and overseeing the initial renovations on the schoolhouse. Word of the school spread quickly, and Josephine soon found herself meeting with mothers eager to enroll their children. As Jacob had predicted, the Martinez family provided 6 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. 3 more came from the Miller family to the east, and 4 from the families of ranch hands who lived in small cabins on the property. 13 students to start, Josephine told Jacob over supper one evening. More than I expected. Told you there was need, Jacob said, pleased with her success. People around here want better for their children. Education's the way to get it. The schoolhouse renovations progressed rapidly under Jacob's supervision. New windows were installed, the leaky roof repaired, and simple desks constructed by Daniel, the ranch's blacksmith who also proved skilled with woodworking. Josephine ordered books and supplies from Promise Creek, spending her own savings rather than ranch funds for these initial expenses. By the end of the 3rd week after Garrett's departure, the schoolhouse was ready, and Josephine had set an opening date for the following Monday. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared her lessons, adapting her Boston curriculum to the needs of frontier children with varying levels of previous education. The school's opening day dawned bright and clear. Josephine dressed with special care in one of her nicer dresses, pinning up her hair in a neat style that she hoped conveyed both authority and approachability. She arrived at the schoolhouse early, arranging books and slates on the desks, writing a welcome message on the new blackboard. The children began arriving shortly after, some on horseback, others in wagons with their parents, a few on foot from the nearby ranch houses. They entered shyly at first, eyeing their new teacher with curiosity and caution. Welcome, Josephine greeted them warmly. Please find a seat. We'll begin in a few minutes. Maria Martinez, the oldest at 14, approached Josephine with a bouquet of wildflowers. These are for you, Miss Miller. Mama said it's tradition to bring the teacher flowers on the first day. Touched by the gesture, Josephine accepted the bouquet. Thank you, Maria, they're beautiful. By 9 o'clock, all 13 students were seated, ranging from 6-year-old Tommy Miller to 14-year-old Maria. Josephine stood before them, suddenly reminded of her first day teaching in Boston, the same flutter of nerves and excitement in her stomach. Good morning, she began. My name is Miss Miller and I'll be your teacher. We have much to learn together, but first, I'd like each of you to introduce yourself and tell me one thing you hope to learn this year. The school day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and basic lessons. Josephine quickly discovered that while some of the children could read and write at a basic level, others had never held a book before. She would need to create different lesson plans for different ability groups, challenging, but not impossible. As the children departed at the end of the day, Josephine felt a deep satisfaction. This was meaningful work, perhaps even more so than her teaching in Boston had been. These children had fewer opportunities, greater obstacles to overcome. What she could provide them might truly change the course of their lives. Jacob was waiting for her when she returned to the ranch house, his expression unusually grave. Carver boys were seen near the east boundary today, he reported without preamble. Tom Miller spotted them when he was bringing his kids to school. Josephine felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Do you think they know about the school? Bound to, Jacob confirmed. Not much happens around here without word spreading. But they'd be fools to try anything with children present. And if they're fools, Josephine asked quietly, Jacob's hand rested briefly on the gun at his hip, then they'll regret it. I've doubled the watch. and Daniel will escort you to and from the schoolhouse each day until we're sure there's no threat." "I appreciate the precaution," Josephine said, though she hated the thought of armed guards becoming necessary for a simple school. That night, lying in bed, Josephine found herself thinking of Garrett, wondering where he was on the trail to Kansas, if the drive was proceeding as planned, if he ever thought of the ranch and those he had left behind. The realization that she missed him came as a surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. In the brief time they had known each other, he had become a steady presence in her life, someone she had come to respect and, if she was honest with herself, to care for deeply. The thought was unsettling. She had come to Promise Creek to marry Travis, a man she had believed herself in love with based on their correspondence. Was it possible that in just a few weeks, her heart had shifted its allegiance to his partner? Or was this simply the result of their shared circumstances, the natural bond that formed between people facing common challenges? Josephine had no answers to these questions, and sleep eluded her as she pondered them. Eventually, she rose and went to the window, looking out at the starlit ranch. Somewhere out there, the Carvers were plotting, and somewhere much further away, Garrett Sullivan was driving cattle north, unaware of her confused feelings. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Josephine taught school 6 days a week, gradually winning the trust and affection of her students. In the evenings, she kept the ranch accounts, wrote letters to her few remaining friends in Boston, and continued her shooting practice with Jacob. On Sundays, she often rode with Jacob to visit neighboring ranches, expanding her acquaintance with the local community. There had been no further sightings of the Carvers, though Jacob maintained the increased vigilance. The ranch operations continued smoothly, the remaining cattle healthy, the summer crops harvested and stored for winter. Josephine found herself taking pride in these successes, small though they might seem compared to the larger cattle drive. In late September, nearly 6 weeks after Garrett's departure, a rider arrived from Promise Creek with a telegram. Josephine's heart raced as she accepted it, fearing bad news from the cattle drive. Instead, she found a brief message from Sheriff Davis. "Carver boys left town, headed north with several men. Exercise caution, will send deputies when available." Jacob's expression darkened as he read the telegram over her shoulder. North could mean they're following the cattle drive, or it could mean they're circling around to approach the ranch from an unexpected direction. "What should we do?" Josephine asked, alarm rising within her. "Cancel school for now," Jacob decided. "Too risky having the children traveling back and forth, and we'll bring the remaining hands closer to the main house. No one works alone until we know more." The next day was difficult for Josephine, informing her disappointed students that classes would be temporarily suspended. She provided books and assignments for them to work on at home, promising to resume as soon as it was safe. "Is it because of the Carver boys, Miss Miller?" Maria asked, her young face serious beyond her years. "It's just a precaution," Josephine assured her, not wanting to frighten the children. "Sometimes it's wiser to wait until a storm passes before continuing on your journey." 2 days later, Jacob's caution proved justified. Shortly before dawn, one of the hands on night watch spotted riders approaching from the north, at least 8 men moving with clear purpose toward the ranch. Jacob woke Josephine with the news, his voice urgent but controlled. "They'll be here within the hour. I've positioned the men." Rosa's loading guns in the kitchen. Josephine dressed quickly in a practical skirt and shirtwaist, pinning her hair back securely. She strapped on the holster Garrett had given her, checking that the revolver was fully loaded before descending to the main floor. The ranch hands had taken defensive positions, 2 in the barn with rifles, 1 on the roof of the bunkhouse, 2 with Jacob on the porch, and Daniel behind a water trough near the corral. Rosa stood in the kitchen doorway, a shotgun in her capable hands. "Stay inside," Jacob instructed Josephine. "Away from the windows if shooting starts." "I can help," she insisted, the weight of the revolver at her hip a reminder of her weeks of practice. Jacob considered her for a moment, then nodded. "Second floor, Travis's study, window faces the approach. Good vantage point and you'll have some protection from the wall." Josephine took position as directed, her heart pounding as she watched the riders draw closer. Through Travis's field glasses, she could make out Luke Carver in the lead, his red hair visible beneath his hat. The men with him were strangers to her, rough-looking individuals who rode with the easy confidence of men accustomed to violence. They stopped just beyond rifle range, and Luke Carver raised his hand in a gesture that was neither friendly nor immediately threatening. "Sullivan," he called out. "Show yourself," Jacob stepped forward on the porch. "Sullivan's not here, Carver, you know that. He's on the cattle drive." "Then who's in charge?" Luke demanded. "The Boston lady." Josephine felt a surge of anger at his mocking tone. Before Jacob could respond, she moved to the open window. "I am," she called clearly. "What business do you have here, Mr. Carver?" Luke seemed momentarily taken aback by her direct response. He recovered quickly, a smirk spreading across his face. Well, the schoolmarm's got spine. Our business is simple, madam. We've come for what's ours." "Nothing here belongs to you," Josephine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "The land dispute was settled legally, as Mr. Wilson has already explained to you. Courts don't understand frontier justice," Luke retorted. "Your man Sullivan killed our pa." "An eye for an eye, that's how it works out here. Sheriff Davis found no evidence that Mr. Sullivan was involved in your father's death," Josephine countered. "And threatening this ranch won't change that fact." Luke's expression hardened. "We're not here to threaten, madam, we're here to take. The north section first, then maybe more, depending on how reasonable you decide to be." "The only reasonable course is for you to leave," Josephine said firmly. "This land belongs to the Promise Creek Ranch legally and rightfully. Any attempt to take it will be met with resistance." As if to emphasize her point, the ranch hands shifted their positions slightly, making their armed presence more visible. Luke assessed the situation, clearly counting defenders and calculating odds. "8 of us, 6 of you, not great odds for you folks." "Better than you think," Jacob called. "Sheriff Davis knows you're in the area. Deputies could arrive any time." This information seemed to give Luke pause. He conferred briefly with the men beside him, their voices too low for Josephine to hear. Finally, he turned back toward the house. "We'll be back, schoolmarm, with more men. Sullivan can't stay gone forever, and when he returns, we'll be waiting." With that, the Carvers and their men turned their horses and rode away, moving not toward town but toward the northern boundary, the disputed land. Jacob entered the house once they were safely out of sight. "They're setting up camp on the north section," he reported grimly. "Staking a claim, can they do that?" Josephine asked, joining him in the main room. "They can try," Jacob said, "but possession isn't ownership no matter what they think. Should we send word to Garrett?" Rosa asked, placing the shotgun carefully on the table. Jacob considered the question. "The drive's almost to Kansas by now. A messenger might not reach them before they start back." He looked at Josephine. "It's your decision, Miss Miller. You're in charge." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Josephine's shoulders. "Let's wait," she decided after a moment. "The Carvers are watching, testing our response. If we send a rider after Garrett, they'll know we're concerned. For now, let's maintain our defense of the main ranch and watch their movements." Jacob nodded approvingly. "Sound thinking. We'll set up a rotation, keep eyes on them day and night. If they make any move toward the main property, we'll be ready." The next week passed in a state of tense vigilance. The Carvers remained camped on the north section, occasionally riding close enough to the main ranch to be visible, but never approaching directly. Jacob's men took turns watching their movements, reporting that the interlopers appeared to be building some sort of permanent structure, a direct challenge to the ranch's ownership. Josephine chafed at the confinement, missing her school and the freedom to ride the property. She kept busy with ranch accounts and correspondence, and continued her shooting practice in the yard under Jacob's watchful eye. In the evenings, she often found herself in Travis's study, reading his books and letters, trying to connect with the man she had traveled so far to marry. One night, unable to sleep, she returned to the study and reopened the drawer containing her letters to Travis. Beneath them, she discovered a journal bound in worn leather. Opening it hesitantly, she recognized Travis's handwriting immediately. The journal contained Travis's private thoughts about the ranch, his plans for expansion, and occasionally reflections on his partnership with Garrett. Josephine knew she should probably close the book, respect the privacy of a man who could no longer defend it, but curiosity won out. She turned pages until entries from the previous year caught her eye, the period when Travis had begun corresponding with her. Wrote to the Boston teacher again today, one entry read. Her letters are a breath of fresh air in this dusty existence. Garrett thinks I'm rushing matters, proposing marriage to a woman I've never met. Perhaps he's right, but I feel time slipping away. The doctor in Promise Creek confirmed what I suspected. My heart is weak, unlikely to sustain me more than a year or two at most. I've told no one, not even Garrett. A wife would secure the ranch's future, provide Garrett with a partner after I'm gone. Miss Miller seems ideal, educated, independent, yet feminine in the best sense. I believe she and Garrett would make excellent partners in time, though of course I've hinted at none of this in my letters to her. Josephine's hands trembled as she read the words. Travis had known he was dying, had sought a wife not just for companionship, but to ensure the ranch's future after his death. Had, in his way, been matchmaking between her and Garrett all along. She turned more pages, finding additional entries that confirmed Travis's deteriorating health and his hopes for her arrival. The final entry was dated just 3 days before his death. House is finished at last. Everything ready for Josephine's arrival next month. Garrett remains skeptical of my plans, though he's grown curious about her from her letters. I hope they will come to care for each other as I've imagined. My time grows short, chest pains worsening. If fate is kind, I'll live to see her arrive to make our marriage legal before the end. If not, I trust Garrett to welcome her, to help her find her place here. 2 people I care for deeply, building something meaningful together that would be a legacy worth leaving. Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she closed the journal. Travis had not been killed in a land dispute with Carver. He had died of heart failure, his death perhaps hastened by the confrontation but ultimately caused by the condition he had kept secret. And he had specifically chosen her, not just as a wife for himself, but as a future partner for Garrett. The realization was overwhelming. She sat in Travis's chair, journal clutched to her chest, until dawn light began to filter through the study window. Questions tumbled through her mind. Had Garrett known about Travis's health? Did he know about Travis's matchmaking intentions? And most importantly, what did this mean for her own growing feelings toward Garrett? Exhausted but determined, Josephine finally rose and prepared for the day. She would not confront Jacob with her discovery yet. First, she needed time to process what she had learned, to decide what it meant for her future at Promise Creek Ranch. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, not from the direction of the Carvers' camp, but from town. Jacob met the man at the edge of the yard, accepting a telegram before sending him on his way. "It's from Garrett," Jacob announced as he entered the house, finding Josephine in the main room. Drive successful, returning with full crew 4 days out. Relief washed over Josephine. "Thank goodness, and perfect timing given our situation with the Carvers." "Indeed," Jacob agreed. "Should we send a rider to warn him about the Carvers' camp?" Josephine considered the question. Yes, she decided, not to ask for help but to ensure they aren't ambushed on their return. The Carvers might be watching the main trails. Jacob nodded approvingly. "I'll send Daniel. He's our fastest rider, knows the back routes." The next 4 days passed with excruciating slowness. The Carvers continued their occupation of the north section, their new structure a crude cabin now clearly visible from the ridge. Daniel had not returned, presumably having met up with Garrett and the returning cattle drive. Josephine found herself watching the horizon constantly, hoping for any sign of their approach. On the morning of the 4th day, Jacob spotted dust clouds to the south. "That'll be them," he said with satisfaction. Coming in from the back trail, Daniel must have reached them in time. Josephine felt her heart quicken at the news. She retreated to her room, changing from her work clothes into a simple but becoming dress of deep blue, pinning her hair more carefully than she had in weeks. She recognized the impulse for what it was, a desire to look her best for Garrett's return, but couldn't bring herself to resist it. By mid-afternoon, the returning cowhands were visible from the house, a long line of riders moving steadily toward the ranch. Josephine stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the sun, searching for Garrett among the approaching men. She spotted him at the head of the column, tall and straight in the saddle, his familiar form causing an unexpected surge of emotion. He saw her too, raising his hand in greeting long before he was close enough for words. The yard erupted into activity as the men arrived, horses being unsaddled, gear unloaded, reunions between the returning hands and those who had remained behind. Through it all, Josephine stood on the porch, watching as Garrett dismounted and handed his reins to a waiting young hand. He approached the house slowly, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. Dust coated his clothing, fatigue lined his face, but his eyes were bright as they met hers. "Josephine," he said simply. "Welcome home, Garrett," she replied, the words feeling entirely natural. For a moment they simply stood looking at each other, the bustle of the ranch yard fading into the background. Then Rosa emerged from the house, breaking the spell. "Senor Sullivan, come eat." "You must be hungry after such a journey." Garrett smiled at the older woman. "Starving, Rosa. Trail food gets tiresome after 8 weeks." Inside, as Garrett washed away the trail dust and changed into clean clothes, Jacob briefed him on the situation with the Carvers. Josephine sat quietly, watching Garrett's expression darken as he learned of the incursion. "Bold move," he said finally, "even for the Carvers." "They seem determined to force a confrontation," Jacob agreed. "Been watching us, testing our defenses." "And you've kept everyone safe," Garrett said, his gaze moving to Josephine. "The school, temporarily closed," she admitted. "It seemed prudent given the circumstances." Garrett nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You made the right call. Children's safety comes first." He turned back to Jacob. "How many men do they have?" "8 that we've seen. Could be more by now. We have 15 back from the drive, plus the 6 who stayed," Garrett calculated. "Better odds than they'll be expecting." "What are you planning?" Josephine asked, concern evident in her voice. Garrett's expression softened slightly. "Nothing rash, but they need to understand that occupying our land has consequences." The discussion continued through supper, strategies proposed and rejected as they sought the safest way to resolve the standoff. Josephine listened intently, occasionally offering her own thoughts, which Garrett considered with surprising seriousness. Dawn would be best, he finally decided. "We'll approach from multiple directions, surround their camp, show strength without necessarily using it. And if they resist?" Josephine asked. "Then we're prepared for that too," Garrett said grimly. "But I'm hoping Luke Carver has enough sense to recognize when he's outmatched." After the meal, as Jacob left to brief the men on the next day's plan, Josephine found herself alone with Garrett for the first time since his return. They stood on the porch, watching as darkness settled over the ranch. "The drive was successful?" she asked, searching for a neutral topic. "Very," Garrett confirmed. "Got top dollar for the cattle. Ranch is financially secure for the next year at least." "I'm glad," Josephine said sincerely, "and I'm glad you're back safely." Garrett turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "The ranch looks good." "You and Jacob kept things running smoothly." "We tried," she said. "Though the Carvers complicated matters. You handled it well," he assured her, "better than many men would have." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Josephine gathered her courage, deciding that honesty was needed. "I found Travis's journal," she said quietly, "while you were away." Garrett stilled beside her. "I see. Did you know about his heart condition?" He sighed heavily, leaning against the porch railing. "Not at first. Suspected something was wrong the last few months. He tired easily, had spells where he couldn't catch his breath, but he never confirmed it until the end." "And did you know why he wanted a wife, that he was?" Josephine hesitated, unsure how to phrase it, that he was playing matchmaker. Garrett finished for her, a hint of wry humor in his voice. "No, not until after he died. Found a letter he'd written to me to be opened in the event of his death. Explained everything." "Why didn't you tell me?" Josephine asked, no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. "How could I?" Garrett turned to face her fully. You just learned the man you traveled thousands of miles to marry was dead, telling you he'd selected you partially as a suitable partner for his friend seemed cruel, presumptuous. It was, Josephine agreed. Presumptuous of him, I mean. To make such plans without consulting either of us. Travis always thought he knew best, Garrett said, affection mixing with exasperation in his voice, especially when it came to other people's lives. And now, Josephine asked, heart pounding, now that we both know his intentions. Garrett was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense as it held hers. Now we make our own choices, he said finally, based on what we want, not what Travis wanted for us. And what do you want, Garrett? The question was barely above a whisper. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. I want you to stay, he said simply. Not because Travis arranged it, not because you own half the ranch, but because you belong here now. Because the thought of you leaving, he paused, seemingly struggling to find the right words. The thought of you leaving would make this place empty, no matter how many people remained. Josephine's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. I want to stay too, she admitted. I came here expecting one life and found another. A harder one, perhaps, but also more real, more meaningful. Garrett's hand reached for hers, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I'm not Travis, he said quietly. I'm not educated or refined. I don't write poetry or make grand plans. I'm just a man who works the land, who tries to build something that will last. I know who you are, Josephine said, turning her hand to interlace her fingers with his. I've seen you with the horses, with the land, with the people who depend on you. I've seen your strength and your kindness. Your integrity, that's the man I've come to care for. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Garrett's expression softened, the usual guardedness in his eyes giving way to something warmer, more open. Josephine, he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. When Josephine responded, moving closer into his embrace, Garrett deepened the kiss, one hand cradling her face with surprising tenderness. When they finally parted, Josephine felt lightheaded, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Garrett's arms remained around her, solid and secure. Not exactly how Travis planned it, he said with a slight smile, but maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. Josephine laughed softly. Perhaps not, though I'd prefer to believe we found our own way to this moment. We did, Garrett assured her. Travis may have brought you here, but everything since has been our choice, our path. The sound of approaching footsteps caused them to step apart, though Garrett kept hold of her hand. Jacob appeared at the edge of the porch, pausing when he noticed their closeness. Sorry to interrupt, he said, a knowing look in his eyes. Men are ready for tomorrow. Thought you might want to go over the final details. Be right there, Garrett promised. As Jacob retreated tactfully, he turned back to Josephine. We'll finish this conversation later. We will, she agreed. Be careful tomorrow, Garrett. The Carvers won't give up easily. Neither will we, he said firmly. This ranch, this land, it's worth fighting for, worth building a life on. The implication of his words warmed her. Yes, she said simply. It is. Dawn broke clear and cold the next morning as Garrett led 20 men toward the Carvers' camp on the northern section. Josephine, despite her protests, had been instructed to remain at the main house with Rosa and one of the older hands for protection. She watched from the upstairs window as the riders disappeared over the ridge, her hand unconsciously touching her lips, still sensitive from Garrett's goodbye kiss. So much had changed in the past 24 hours, yet the danger remained very real. The wait was excruciating. 1 hour stretched into 2, then 3, with no sign of the returning men. Josephine paced the house, unable to concentrate on any task, imagining scenarios ranging from peaceful resolution to violent confrontation. Shortly before noon, the sound of approaching horses drew her to the porch. Relief flooded through her as she saw Garrett leading the men back, all apparently unharmed. Behind them, tied to their saddles, rode the Carvers and their men, faces sullen but uninjured. Sheriff Davis is meeting us in town, Garrett explained as he dismounted. These boys are going to answer for trespassing, property damage, and attempted theft of land. They didn't resist, Josephine asked, surprised by the relatively peaceful outcome. Oh, they tried, Garrett said, a hint of grim satisfaction in his voice. But 20 armed men approaching from all sides tends to change minds quickly. Luke there made some threats, fired a shot that didn't hit anyone. After that, they surrendered. Jacob and most of the hands continued toward town with the prisoners, while Garrett remained behind with Josephine. It's over, she asked once they were alone. This part, yes, Garrett confirmed. They'll face charges, spend some time in jail. The disputed land claim will be reaffirmed in court. He took her hand, drawing her to sit beside him on the porch steps. But ranching always brings new challenges. Drought, disease, market prices dropping. It's never truly over. I understand that now, Josephine said. It's a life of constant work, constant vigilance. And constant rewards, Garrett added, watching something grow under your care, building something that might outlast you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warming them as they contemplated the future. The school can reopen now, Josephine said finally. The children have missed nearly 2 weeks of lessons. And the ranch accounts need reviewing after the cattle sale, Garrett added. Plus, there's winter preparations, fences to mend before the snow. One day at a time, Josephine suggested with a smile, beginning with reopening the school tomorrow. Garrett nodded, then hesitated, his expression growing more serious. Before we return to routine, there's something I want to ask you. Josephine's heart quickened at his tone. Yes, I know it's soon. We've known each other only a few months, and you came here expecting to marry Travis, not. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I find myself unwilling to wait, to risk losing what we've found. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the sunlight, a simple gold band with a single small diamond. This was my mother's, he explained, the only thing I have left of her. Josephine's breath caught as Garrett took her hand, his own slightly unsteady for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. Josephine Miller, I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I love you. I believe we could build something remarkable together, not just a ranch, but a life. A family. Would you consider becoming my wife? Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she looked at this man who had become so essential to her happiness in such a short time. A man different in every way from what she had expected, yet exactly what she needed. Yes, she said simply, her voice steady despite her tears. Yes, Garrett Sullivan, I will marry you. His smile transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared purpose, shared challenges, and shared joy. 2 weeks later, they were married in the small church in Promise Creek, with Jacob giving the bride away and Rosa weeping happily in the front pew. The students from Josephine's school attended, Maria Martinez serving as her only attendant, carrying the same wildflowers she had brought on the first day of school. As they spoke their vows, Josephine thought briefly of Travis, the man whose letters had brought her west, whose vision had created the ranch, whose unexpected matchmaking had led to this moment. There was gratitude in the thought, but no regret. Her path had taken an unexpected turn, leading her not to the life she had imagined, but to one far richer and more meaningful. The following spring, as the ranch bloomed with new life, Josephine gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after both Travis and Sheriff Davis, who had become a friend to the ranch. The school continued to grow, eventually requiring a larger building and a second teacher to assist Josephine. The cattle operation expanded as well, with Garrett purchasing the land to the east that he and Travis had once discussed. On the 5th anniversary of her arrival at Promise Creek Ranch, Josephine stood on the porch, watching as Garrett taught their son to ride his first pony, their 3-year-old daughter Catherine clapping her hands with delight from her perch on Jacob's shoulders. The ranch had prospered, the school had flourished, and the community had grown stronger around both. Happy? Garrett asked that evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant hues. Completely, Josephine answered truthfully, leaning against his shoulder. Though I still sometimes think about how strange life's paths can be, I came here as a bride for a man I never met, only to find my heart belonged to his partner. Travis would be pleased, Garrett said, his arm tightening around her shoulders. He loved this land, wanted to see it thrive, wanted us both to be happy. Then he got his wish, Josephine said softly, because this land is thriving and we are very happy indeed. As darkness fell over Promise Creek Ranch, Josephine Sullivan, once a Boston schoolteacher who had traveled west as a mail-order bride, felt the deep contentment of a woman who had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of a man who had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to go, and in the life they had built together on the wild Texas frontier.